Good morning, Pilgrim, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to another session of Shema. Today, we will be talking about another important individual who has been a key part or a contributor to Protestantism. Her name is Margaret de Navarre from 1492 to 1549. Now, the Gospel of Luke notes a large group of prominent, well-to-do women, including Mary Magdalene, Susanna, and Joanna, the wife of a royal official in Herod's court, who traveled with Jesus and supported his ministry out of their personal means. Later, in the book of Acts, Luke records several occasions in which affluent, noble Greek women came to faith, to the most notably Lydia of Thyatira, who placed her considerable resources at the disposal of Paul's ministry team and provided a bridgehead for the gospel to spread into southern Greece and across Europe. Throughout the history of the church, God has continued to raise up such women of faith who have used their positions of influence and power to support the work of the gospel and to promote the kingdom of Christ. Margaret de Navarre was one of these women, the older sister of the French king Francois I. She lived at the crossroads of the Renaissance and the Reformation. American historian Samuel Putnam described her as the first modern woman. Margaret was considered to be a true Renaissance woman. Margaret was a poet, playwright, diplomat, cultural leader, royal advisor, a patroness of the arts and learning, a true Renaissance woman in both the literal and figurative sense. Thanks to her mother, she received the same classical education as her brother Francois. She learned Latin, Greek, and Italian and became well-versed in literature, history, philosophy, and theology. When she was about 10 years old, her parents attempted to arrange a marriage to Prince of Wales, the future King Henry VIII of England. The arrangement fell through, which was fortuitous for Margaret, given Henry's subsequent history with 6 of his wives. As it turned out, Margaret was to have a connection with one of Henry's wives-to-be, Anne Boleyn, before she married Henry. Anne spent time in France as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Claude, wife of Margaret's brother, the king. It is believed Margaret befriended Anne, helped expose her to humanist and Reformation ideas, and later sent her a copy of her religious poem entitled Mirror of the Sinful Soul. The Mirror is a personal symbolic narrative of Margaret's faith journey, pursuing Christ as her father, brother, and lover of her soul. After Anne's death, her 11-year-old daughter, the future Queen Elizabeth I, translated the poem into English for her stepmother, Catherine Parr. Henry VIII's last wife. Some details are murky, but this link between Margaret, Anne Boleyn, Catherine Parr, and Elizabeth I suggests Margaret had a seminal influence on the early Reformation in England. Margaret de Navarre was truly a Renaissance woman. She was born in the same year that Columbus discovered America. Margaret was the older sister of one of the most famous king of France, Francis I, to whom Calvin dedicated his institutes of the Christian religion. She became a queen in her own right by marriage to the King of Navarre, Henry III. Her own upbringing was unusual for the time, as she received a nearly identical education to her brother, who was being trained for the crown of France. During her lifetime, she was one of the most educated women in France, as well as a powerful diplomat, one of the king's closest advisors, and literary theologically patronis. During Francis I's captivity in Spain, Margaret even traveled in person into enemy territory to negotiate his release with Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor. It was also during these years in 1520s that she began to gain exposure to the writings of the Reformation. Later, she was persecuted by the powerful Roman Catholic Sorbonne University for the evangelical tendencies of her own writings, and one author claims she could have been burned at the stake had she not been the king's sister. Her patronage extended from financial sponsorship of the theologians and their work to giving refuge to those fleeing the first persecutions of the early 16th century. At one time, she even took in John Calvin, who was fleeing Paris before going to Geneva. Other men she protected or supported include Gerard Roussel and Clement Marot. Her correspondence includes an even wider circle from Erasmus to a variety of popes to Calvin and many other reformers. She was comfortable in every setting, from reforming corrupt abbeys to being the hostess of the king's court to working with spies and diplomatic intrigue. Margaret lived in an unusual position in the early days of Protestant development in France, and she didn't even formally renounce the Roman Catholic Church, choosing to stay on relatively good terms with both the Vatican and Geneva. By doing this, she managed to navigate within the existing political and religious structures to work towards the changes she saw were needed. The influence and legacy of Margaret de Navarre. Margaret's reform beliefs and support of the Protestant movement strained her relationship with her brother and especially with her husband, both of whom remained staunch Catholics. She continued to visit France and intercede with her brother on behalf of persecuted Protestants. For a time, he deferred to her out of respect, and many lives were spared through her efforts. But as Francis I grew more strident in his opposition to Protestantism, her influence over him began to wane, and the persecutions increased. Despite all this, Margaret never broke with the Catholic Church, preferring internal reform over confrontation. Ever the diplomat and mediator, she maintained a cordial connections with several popes and heads of states, as well as the Protestant theologians and humanist scholars. She corresponded with Calvin and Marie Dentier, with whom she discussed biblical literacy and women's roles in the church, and also with Erasmus. The great Dutch humanist scholar held Margaret in high esteem. For a long time, I have cherished all the many excellent gifts that God bestowed upon you. Prudence worthy of a philosopher, chastity, moderation, piety, and invincible strength of soul, and a marvelous contempt for all the vanities of this world. Who could keep from admiring in a great king's sister such qualities as this? so rare even among the priests and monks. Let us always remember this tender queen of Navarre, wrote French historian Jules Michelet, in whose arms our people fleeing from prison of the pyre found safety, honor, and friendship. Our gratitude to you, mother of our French Renaissance. Your heart was that of our saints, your heart the nest of our freedom. Perhaps the best summary of Margaret's life comes from American historian Will Durant. In Margaret, the Renaissance and the Reformations were for a moment her influence radiated throughout France. Every free spirit looked upon her as protectress and ideal. Margaret was the embodiment of charity. She walked unescorted in the streets of Navarre, allowing anyone to approach her, and would listen at first hand to the sorrows of the people. She called herself the Prime Minister of the poor. Near the end of her life, Margaret reflected, God, I am assured, will carry forward the work He has permitted me to commence, and my place will be more than filled by my daughter, who has the energy and moral courage in which I fear I have been deficient. Her daughter, Gianni de Albert, would become something of a warrior queen. She made the Reformed faith the official religion of Navarre, spearheaded the translation of the scriptures into the language of the country, and became the political and spiritual leader of the French Protestant Huguenots. In light of all this, Margaret's words seem prophetic. Poet, playwright, diplomat, cultural leader, royal advisor, patroness of the arts and learning, Margaret was equally at home hosting her culturally thriving royal court or engaging in international intrigue. It's wonder her life hasn't been made into a movie or a TV series. But no matter, Margaret de Navarre was prodigiously gifted woman who moved in the circles of power and stood at the crossroads of two major historical movements. She was used by God to promote cultural excellence, defend the faith, and protect those who proclaimed it. That's a better legacy than being the subject of a cable series, a sentiment with which Margaret would no doubt agree. Once again, thank you for joining us for today's Shema session. I hope you learned something about our history of Protestantism. Tomorrow, we will see you again with the Bar session together with the Reverend Eliezer Villarin. We hope to see you tomorrow. God bless everyone and have a blessed day.